Hello, folks, and welcome to Serial Killer Special. I renamed it again. From at the beginning, it was Serial Killer Sunday. Now then it became Serial Killer Saturdays, and now it's just Serial Killer Special going forward. We have had a break in this for a good number of months because for you who know that Mr. Gosmi has had a bunch of haters going after him since May, June, something like that. And I really wanted to see if things cooled down so he could be on this final episode about the trial of Aileen Wuornos. And as it seems, his haters won't give up, and not for a foreseeable future. I do have something planned for these haters, so be on the lookout for that one. Now, for you who don't know, Aileen Wuornos was active for 11 months, 1989 to 1990. She had 7 victims, and she was caught quite fast, so to speak. And we have been watching the trial from gavel to gavel, and today we have come to closing arguments and verdict. It has been an interesting, really interesting series because the trial is so clean. The prosecution, well, except on a couple of occasions, no trickery and no hiding stuff from the defense. When the judge rules, everybody listens. It's been, in that regard, a delight to watch it. Not much to comment on, but I mean, it's been an interesting ride. And of course, this is also on Rumble. I will pin the link on the top of the chat for you who prefer or might want to try on that platform. There you go. It will be pinned on the top of the chat. Because I use Rumble and Twitter, because don't put your eggs in one basket, so to speak. If someday in the future YouTube decides to, we don't want him and his content on anymore, I will have the beginnings of another I will have a start on another platform. But so far YouTube seems relatively fine with it. At least half of my serial killer specials can keep getting monetized. Half of them won't. So we will simply see how this one turns up. You will not get ads in midstream here. You might get an ad going in and going out, but no ads in the middle of it. That is how I prefer it done. But we are here for this. For the conclusion of Aileen the trial of Aileen Wuornos. There was a really, really good movie made about this with Charlize Theron playing Aileen. Now that movie had, well, they got almost everything wrong, but it was a nice watch. It was a nice watch. And hello, by the way, folks. Hello to Steph, Paralegal Liz, Pernilla, Flawed and Human. I saw Dave earlier, and yeah, let's just move on with it. Get on with it. And I am streaming this from Wheelhammer Media's channel. So go over and have a subscription on his channel as a thank you. This means that this stream here is audio enhanced. All right. Let's move on. Let's get on with it.
We said earlier, I think we all join in this appreciation for your service. No one volunteered. Any one of you could escape.
Yeah, this is it. That is the jurors, by the way. Back then, nobody had an issue being caught on camera.
In fact, the responsibility avoided. You chose to meet your responsibility. We all thank you. It's always a little uncomfortable deciding where to stand in this courtroom. By design, you don't stand in the Senate until you hear yourself. So, if you were too close, forgive us. We want to talk to you. This is the only opportunity I will have. I will be followed by Ms. Jenkins. Then the judge's instructions. I'd like to just briefly talk about the instructions for a few moments and the potential forms of the verdict to help familiarize you with it, although no instruction on the law will come from me or any other lawyer in the courtroom. They come from the court, Judge Blunt only. The form for the verdict is relatively simple. There are two potential. One reads, as to count one, a majority of the jury by a vote of blank, and that must be at least 7, advise and recommend to the court that it impose the death penalty upon Aileen Wuornos, also known as Susan Lynn Verhoeven, also known as Lori Christine Grody, also known as Cammy Marsh Green, in the date. The other potential verdict, as to count 1, the jury advises and recommends to the court that it impose a sentence of life imprisonment upon Aileen Wuornos, also known as Susan Lynn Verhoeven, also known as Lori Christine Grody, also known as Cammy Marsh Green, without possibility of parole for 25 years. To be signed by your foreperson. Neither verdict need be unanimous. If you do not vote by at least a vote of 7 to 5, then you use the second form. If you do vote by majority, which would be 7 to 12, you recommend the death penalty, you mention the judge. This is known as an advisory sentence, but carries great weight with the court, and should certainly not be taken lightly in any fashion or respect. I know you won't. But only the judge imposes the sentence. Juries do not. Not every murder case, in fact, not even every first-degree murder case is a death penalty case. And your participation as jurors is only a part of a long chain of events that began long before you ever imagined that you'd be sitting here, and will continue long after you've departed and gone back to your normal lives. It begins with a decision by the prosecutor to take the case to the grand jury, followed by a grand jury indictment, which is not evidence of anything, it's simply a charge. And then ultimately it goes to a trial where a jury must find unanimously guilt of a capital offense, which you have done. Then it returns to the prosecutor for a decision whether to continue to seek the death penalty. Again, that responsibility rests on who's making. And ultimately to you again for a recommendation verdict, and then on to the judge and on into the judicial system. Your responsibilities are here and now. It began in Volusia County, and this matter should end in Volusia County. You're not to look to other jurisdictions to attend to justice in this case. You're not to mitigate or aggravate based upon what some other jury, judge, or court may do, if there is ever another jury, judge, or court regarding this woman. Finality for Mr. Mallory's death, her responsibility rests solely and exclusively with regard to the recommendation of this jury. His Honor will instruct you on the aggravating and mitigating circumstances, so you need not try to grope, so to speak, for what should we do, how should we be guided. You will be well guided by the court. You will be told of the aggravating and mitigating circumstances available under law, and there are many more than you will hear about, such as the killing of a government official in the capacity of his duties, and on and on. And there are plenty on both sides. The only ones you need to be concerned with are those which the judge will instruct you. The state has established and offered proof and evidence throughout the trial, and please remember that includes all of the evidence you've heard since we've begun, of the 11 possible aggravating factors. We have established beyond a reasonable doubt 6. Any one alone, if in your opinion is sufficient to justify recommendation death, is sufficient. It's not a numbers game, it's a weighing game. That's the weight of the aggravators, not how many aggravators versus how many mitigators, but the weight of each and every aggravator proved and or balanced against the weight of mitigators established. We have proven that in fact, and this is one of the aggravators, that this defendant, Ms. Wuornos, has been convicted of a prior violent felony, armed robbery. That is a statutory aggravator. We have proven, and your verdict is verified, that the murder was committed during a robbery, in this case. A third aggravator we've proven is that the murder was committed to avoid arrest. The fourth aggravator we've proven is that the murder was committed for financial gain in the process, in this case for robbery. Your verdict is confirmed that already unanimous. We believe the evidence establishes that the murder was especially heinous and cruel, showing the total indifference of life, and that the murder was committed in a cold and calculated, premeditated fashion. Premeditation certainly was established by your verdict. The mitigators that you will probably hear about, since this is my only opportunity, I want to address them briefly. One, we believe that they will take the position that Ms. Wuornos was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance. Number two, that her capacity to know what she was doing and to inform her conduct of the law was substantially impaired because of the mental condition. Those two aggravators are built entirely and exclusively upon her story. If in fact she sat in the car and got out and killed him with deliberation and not as a result of being attacked and ravaged, which she had already rejected, then the extreme mental or emotional disturbance, which all the psychologists indicate would have been triggered by this attack, if it were true, is not there. The same with regard to her capacity to understand what she was doing. They also argue that because of her age, she should not be held fully responsible. At what age do our citizens become responsible for their acts? Certainly 34, 35, 33 were responsible. Is there ever be responsibility? We will also argue something in the realm of victim participation. You have rejected that. And in fact, if her story was taken at its first version, the most, if it is even true, that this man did was agree to engage in sex with her. And that certainly doesn't justify or mitigate a killing. And then there's arguably what we call, like prosecutors call it, kitchen sink ground. It's really not a statutory ground, it covers virtually everything else. It's, in many instances, a plea for sympathy based upon a different packaging. Mental impairment is the defense of last resort. If you don't have facts or law to support your case, then as a defense attorney, you may find that some solace in defense of mental impairment. But under the law, the real question is not whether Aileen Wuornos is a strange person, not whether she has a sour view of the world, not whether she had some unfortunate experiences as a young person, not whether she's explosive, exploitive, violent, and manipulative, and perverted. She's all of those things. She is all of those things. But the question is whether she understood what she was doing, whether she knew what she was doing, whether she knew what she was doing was wrong, and whether she chose to do it regardless of its wrongness and regardless of the consequences to herself and Mr. Malley, and with a total disregard for his life, as if it was nothing. The evidence that was presented by the defense, and the burden is never as great on the defense as the state. The state must establish virtually everything by evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. They have a lighter burden. But their evidence, the entire framework of this defense mechanism called mental impairment, almost in entirety, with a few shreds of arguably supported evidence, is based upon Aileen Wuornos' story and view of life and herself. Recall that these psychologists really had differing approaches, differing ways of reaching their conclusions, and considerably different opinions on a lot of different things. Even as so far as whether simple greeting was an attempt to manipulate people. And that was kind of a light moment, but I use that to emphasize the fact this is really a field that certainly you can't call science. Don't know that we call it art. I don't want to label it, but it certainly is subject to considerable conjecture and potential for abuse, and fraught with the real possibility, if not probability, of the individual feelings of the analyzer becoming the primary focus, because they decide which story to believe, whether or not they believe it all, or whether they believe everything. Well, what did Dr. McMahon believe? She received no report of a rape during the first 4-hour session that she had with Aileen Wuornos back in early 91. Then in March of 91, after a 6.5-hour session, she gets this first story, which is very consistent with what was told to the police. And then 9 months later, in December, she receives the fabrication that you had rejected in your verdict. The interesting thing about Dr. McMahon, she's the lady who testified first, she came to the conclusion that not one other mental health care expert he did, and that was she could tell if the person was lying by the tests. Not one of the other psychologists or Dr. Barnard, the psychiatrist, said that she could tell the person was lying by the tests. And she went on to say that if in fact the story she finally accepted, and the one Dr. McMahon based her whole opinion on, is the alcohol, rape, bondage story. That's what her whole thing is based on. She took that as truth. You have not. Dr. McMahon said, if that story's not true, then she would have to start all over again. We'd probably have a totally different diagnosis. She also went on to say that whether Aileen Wuornos knew right or wrong at the time she killed this man was irrelevant. Very relevant. Dr. Crop demonstrated, I think, the uncertainty in the field for us. Also, the arbitrariness of these designations. He said if a child was 15 years and 1 day old, therefore that person wouldn't qualify. We all know that things subject to mental processes are not that cut and dry, but that is where they belong. He said that she would, in fact, by him, be diagnosed an antisocial personality, except she set no fires before she was 15, which would have given him the additional indicator, and that she was not a truant before 15. Well, the evidence in the files verified by the other psychologists and even on cross-examination, the fires were set before 15, and everyone else found it to be a truant.
Hey, Torin Raid. Thank you, Torin. Thank you so much. That is so nice of you. That is so nice of you. You have just walked into the trial of Aileen Wuornos. This is closing arguments. It is the final chapter in this serial killer special. I have a whole playlist on YouTube with serial killer specials where I watch old trials with serial killers. I have prior to Aileen Wuornos, I covered the case of Jeffrey Dahmer and his trial. And so if you want serial killer content, I have the streams for you. All right, let's continue with the closing arguments in the 1992 trial, Florida versus Aileen Monster Wuornos.
But he wanted to bring in sexual innuendo. Remember, his specialty is sexual child abuse. That's why I was here. Dirty little innuendo against the family. And that's all it was. Dirty little innuendo. Not supported by evidence, refuted by all of the psychologists, in fact, refuted by Aileen Wuornos herself. He went on to say that he would not find her antisocial to pass because she displayed conscience and cross-examined on that issue. The fact is, he said that the story was not true of the alcohol rate. And we just call it that without getting into details. The alcohol rate. But it was not true of the fact that he diagnosed. Then we had Dr. Toomer from Miami. He told us that the biological mother died of cirrhosis of the liver due to alcoholism. Well, the biological mother is still alive. And in fact, he was talking about the grandmother. But they were kind of trying to tie a genetic chain that through genetics, this woman is what she is. In fact, the son of the woman who raised Aileen Wuornos came in and told you that it was not cirrhosis of the liver, and there was no alcoholism in this woman. Another attempt to smear someone else to get sympathy for Aileen Wuornos. What he did tell us is that he never asked Aileen Wuornos one single fact about what happened. He came here to give you his opinion as to whether the mental condition affected her behavior, and didn't answer one single question about her behavior. Not another mental health care expert used that procedure. And in fact, he said it would be unimportant. That in fact, if she had sat there coldly, deliberately, and intentionally killed and robbed, it wouldn't make any difference in his diagnosis at all. She's still a borderline personality. In fact, they all told us that she's borderline personality and had been since she was a teenager. And killing didn't have a whole lot to do with it. And that's precisely the point. Borderline personality didn't have a whole lot to do with it. She lived successfully 34 years. in her own fashion. She's the only way of life to kill no one. Until she got a gun and decided that was a better way, the way she wanted to follow. What they told us was that she just doesn't think quite like most folks. Final, aggressive, angry. Did we need psychologists to tell us that? Everyone, we did that, they heard the evidence. That woman doesn't think like most folks. But that doesn't excuse her to go out and do whatever she wants to do, especially killing this mountain. Finally, Dr. Barnard, the last to testify, legal health care experts, he was a psychiatrist as opposed to psychiatrist. He diagnosed her, yes, he said she had borderline personality defect, but her primary trouble was antisocial personality disorder. Something found in perhaps 1% of the female population. Everyone, without exception, of the mental health care experts, including Dr. Barnard, agreed that Aileen Wuornos at the time of the killing knew right from wrong. That she knew the consequences of her acts and she was able to conform to the law, and that she was responsible for her acts and that she's not insane. That is not and has not been, nor will it be, in dispute. So who is responsible? Aileen Wuornos says that maybe genetics, with no evidence whatever to support that. She says, through the psychologist, basically, that it's in her own testimony, it was her parents in the home that caused it. The evidence from others refute that, particularly the evidence from her brother. Remember all of these histories that the doctors talk about, how she wasn't treated right, and there wasn't a great deal of abuse even in those histories. All abuse is sanctified at times. Today's society, some people call that abuse. Maybe that's why we're in the trouble we're in today. But in any event, the only indication of anything in the home being wrong is Aileen Wuornos' story, fed to psychologists who came to testify for her. She was disciplined, and she doesn't like that. She doesn't like discipline. She doesn't like responsibility. She even told her foster father, who had taken her in and cared for her just like the other children, "Can't stand me. You're not even my real father." She would even blame prostitution on others, although she told us that she liked the $60 to $100 an hour per event a lot better than 75 cents an hour. And finally, she said Ty Moore was at fault. Must be her, because she was living off my money. Everyone but Aileen Wuornos is responsible, even the victim. Even the victim. I guess where she is laid the blame. He has no voice here except me. This is not a case about forgiveness. You can pray for her soul, but that's not what we're about here today. It is not about mercy. That is not what you will hear in the instructions. Mercy is simply another word for sympathy. And that's not what this verse is based on. We've had this long break and we've had plenty of time. It's not based upon anger or will to give it. It's based on the law that you've heard. It's not even about mental illness, because every single mental health care expert that testified, if there appeared to be any mitigation in their testimonies based on her story, but they all agree that she's responsible in every sense of the word legally. It's about a troubled teenager who refused to accept responsibility from the start and chose a lawless lifestyle, a cavorting, moralless lifestyle, and ultimately chose to kill. We began with two totally different stories. We began with two totally different views of the evidence. You're going to hear a totally different view in just a few moments. One view is based entirely and exclusively upon the misrepresentations of Aileen Wuornos. That is the basis for the defense in its entirety, from start to finish. The other view is based upon the evidence, the facts, and the circumstances as revealed by the evidence and truth. Aileen Wuornos said he should die. because he was cheating on his family. She's a prostitute. Said she had to kill him to make money to pay her bills. You want to say, because the age made no difference, had no parents anyway. In her own words to Deputy Hanson, the lady that worked in jail that wasn't interrogating her for plenty of time for her to say whatever she wanted to say, no, not being cut off. She said, after I shot him, he just fell down and was saying, I'm going to die. Oh my God, I'm going to die. And Aileen Wuornos. Yeah, motherfucker. So what? And I shot him a couple more times. It became obscenely simple for Aileen Wuornos to kill. At one moment, Richard Mallory was here. And a few minutes later, by an act of her will, he was no more. It's not that he never existed. It's not that he never breathed and lived and hoped. It's simply that he was no more. By an act of her will, in just 15 or 20 minutes, she extinguished a man's life forever. And all that's left is a few pitiful possessions, junk, the junk of life, all that's left of a man. She told you, you saw her, her words, I'm guilty. I deserve to die. And you know that is the truth. Let your verdict and your decision with good conscience, with strength, and with integrity, speak the truth. Aileen Wuornos deserves the ultimate penalty provided under the law of the state of Florida. Thank you.
Yeah, that was the prosecution's closing argument, the entirety of it. This was not a long trial. I believe it went on for 3 weeks in total. And Aileen Wuornos took the stand herself in her own defense, which was, well, interesting to watch. But again, compared to today's trial, he cut to the chase, he presented what's been said and shown to the jury and asked them for what the prosecution believes is the correct penalty. And it took him 25 minutes, roughly. Well, 24 minutes. Yeah, 25 minutes. 24 minutes and 50-something seconds. Clean, easy to understand. And this is one trial that I don't have much commentary on because it's so clear-cut, so to speak. And yeah. So, but here comes the defense closing arguments.
Law of the state of Florida. Thank you.
Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is perhaps one of the most difficult tasks I've ever been required to do. I must ask you to say, Aileen Wuornos, I must convince you that she should live. It's a difficult task for me because just asking another person not to ask for the life of another human being is so extraordinary. It's so far from the commonplace that all of the knowledge and tools that we use in our everyday life are simply not available to us. It's difficult because how do I explain? How do any of us explain what it's like to see things as Lee does? How do people who are presumably normal, who are presumably unimpaired, how do they understand what it's like to live impaired? How do I make you understand that everything that Lee feels, does, and says is filtered through that disorder, through that impairment? Everything must go through that filter. She is not like the rest of us. Once there was a verdict of guilty, I started trying to think about what to do. I tried to pull together all of my life experiences and the knowledge that I gained over the last few years to try to assist me in doing this. And frankly, I have found that it's just not enough. I don't know what to do or say to convince you that Lee should live. I only know that she should. You have necessarily learned about Lee Wuornos in a vacuum. Everything that you know, everything that you believe about her has been gained from this witness stand. For a brief moment in time, you got to meet Lee Wuornos under situations that, if you listen to the testimony of the experts that came in here, was very, very stressful. They told you what happens to Lee when she is under stress. I can't tell you what the three of us have learned about Lee over the many hours that we have spent with her. You must decide whether Lee should live or die based on what you have seen and what you have heard in this courtroom over the last few days. That decision will probably be the most significant and most difficult decision that any of you will ever have to make. Please understand that those of us seated at that table understand that. And we appreciate how hard this must be. But also understand, when you're trying to make a decision, that the laws of this state embrace the concept of mercy. If you feel that Lee is deserving of mercy, you can vote for mercy. Mercy for Lee is life in prison. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today because late one night in November of 1989, Richard Mallory and Lee Wuornos met on the side of a highway here in Florida. We've all been in this courtroom. We know that that was a tragic, deadly meeting. All of us are asking why, but why did it have to be that? Perhaps the answer to that can be found by going back to that day years ago when Lee, as a young girl, stepped to the side of the road and stuck out her thumb. She had no direction and not a single hope in sight. She carried with her the baggage of abandonment, the forfeiture of a child, of a baby when she was still just a child. She carried with her the inability to figure out how to make it, how to do anything at all to satisfy her basic needs. All of the experts agreed on that. She didn't know how and does not know how to satisfy even the most basic needs. From one ride to the next, and to the next, and to the next, all the way until January of last year. She traveled through this world, always on the outside, traveling through a place in which she has never, ever had a place. She has been living in a world that to her perception is violent and frightening. From that time way back, when she was a little girl, she has been burdened with an impairment or a disorder that makes her intensely needy, makes her intensely afraid of being abandoned and being alone, and yet at the same time causes her to act in such a way that she will not allow anyone to get close to her. The very impairment, the very disorder that makes her need so desperate.
Yeah, apparently at the prosecution's table, there is somebody who cannot stop crying. The prosecution is to the left. In that is in that direction, and defense in that direction. So I'm not entirely sure who it is. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Then they switch places because, yeah, that's the defense table all of a sudden. During the entirety of the trial, they have sat at the other table.
To get close to her. The very impairment, the very disorder that makes her need so desperately prevents her from ever having the satisfaction of fulfilling those needs. You heard the doctors talk about what Lee is like and what she experienced. If you will recall each and every one of them, and that's even the expert, Dr. Bernard, that is called by the state, said that people who suffer from the disorder that Lee suffers from live an ungratified life. They never feel successful. They never feel satisfied. They don't go home at the end of the day knowing that they have reached their fullest potential because she has no idea what her potential is. She doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know what she's all about, and she can't control what she's all about. She's always alone, and she's always frustrated. Dr. Toomer explained it to you, and he said, what Lee is all about is someone feeling that I don't deserve anything good. I don't deserve to be liked. I'm not worthy. And so what she does, because of her impairments, because of her disorder, a disorder that each and every one of the experts told you she had no control over. She didn't ask to be that way. So what she does is when she comes into contact with another person, she's thinking, I I'm not any good. I don't deserve their friendship. They're going to be mean to me. They're going to be rejecting me. And she acts out in such a way that will fulfill that prophecy, will validate her thoughts so that she can say, see, I was right. No one was going to like me. No one was going to want me. Remember what Dr. McMahon said. I think that was a very, very important description of what Lee's all about. She is a damaged, primitive child. Dr. McMahon told you that she has never seen anyone that primitive outside of an institution. But we all know, we've all had the experience of being in this courtroom for the last few weeks. We know that, yes, there was at least one other primitive, damaged person that was not an institution, and it was Lee. And she was working from one exit to the next. She was out on the road, fulfilling some basic needs and assisting in supporting her friend, the only friend she ever had, and engaging in a destructive, dysfunctional relationship. You've heard that that's all she's ever had. She doesn't know anything different. All of the experts told you that Lee views this world as a very, very unhappy place, that she feels persecuted, that she feels that people are against her, that she reacts to the stimuli in her environment. So she has no control. Everything happens to her. She is a person who thinks that pain and unhappiness is inevitable. She doesn't understand. She doesn't know. She doesn't have the ability to control that. The doctors have all told you that she experiences severe mood swings. You've heard that testimony. You've also had an opportunity to see that. They told you about a person who could laugh and cry and get explosively angry, and who always experiences intense emotions. You've got to see it. You've seen it. Remember when Dr. Croft was testifying? Do you remember who Dr. Croft was? He was the gentleman with the beard, kind of salt and pepper hair. He was telling you that Lee's 1 point away from borderline retardation. And she began to laugh. And she began to giggle and be silly, like a little girl. And Dr. Croft explained why that was happening. It's because people that suffer from what she suffers from can never, ever admit that there's anything wrong with them. That they spend their life trying without success to show people that they're all right, that they're okay. They have defenses that they build up. And Dr. Croft said something. He said that the reason people like Lee, who suffer from personality disorders and brain impairment, hold on so hard and so fast to their disorders is because of the pain underneath. They can't ever let that pain be exposed. All of the experts explained Lee's life in the terms of she's on a roller coaster, rapidly moving from one moment to the next, from one mood, and no control over it, laughing in the courtroom, being angry in the courtroom for seemingly no reason, not being able to let anybody help her, not being able to make anybody like her, always turning on the very people that are trying to help her. All of you have seen that in this courtroom. And she has no control of that. She doesn't choose to be that way. What is important about Dr. McMahon's testimony is that she said that Lee, like other people who suffer from personality disorders, see other people coping. They see other people being able to satisfy their basic needs, but they can't figure out how to do it for themselves. So they suffer the exact anxiety and frustration of realizing, but not being able to do anything at all about it. What you have seen in this courtroom and what the experts have described are human beings like Lee, who within seconds go from depression, laughter, but never happiness, and emotional withdrawal. There have been times when it was almost as if Lee was not in this courtroom. You must have seen the times when she had withdrawn to such an extent that you might have wondered, what is this all about? Why? You also have learned that Lee can't control her impulses, and I think all of you have been able to see that. And how frustrating that must be. All of the doctors, all of the experts that testified in this courtroom told you that in forming their opinions, they reviewed investigative reports. They reviewed Lee's school records. They talked to certain people. They read taped interviews of people who had known the family and known what life must have been like back in those days. And without fail, even the state's expert, Dr. Bernard, told you that one of the things that they agreed on, and actually they all agreed, was that Lee came from a dysfunctional family. I think that perhaps the best evidence that Lee comes from a dysfunctional family was her brother, uncle, Barry Wuornos. He was called by the state and he took the witness stand, and he told you that life was good. Life was okay. Dad was great. Lee didn't have any problems. There's never any discussion of Lee having problems, Lee not being able to get along. Then in her teens, yeah, she probably started having some problems, but remember, he was gone. He had left home when Lee was somewhere between 9 and 10. And think about that testimony and then remember what the experts have told you. They have told you that they had reviewed her school records, and that her school records show that she could not hear. She was having hearing problems, that the school was asking for help for Lee, and that her mother, the person that Lee has described as being the angel, responded by saying, she can hear. Lee just doesn't want to follow direction.
Hey, Mr. Jingles is here. Hello, Mr. Jingles. Have you had a good time outside chasing? Thank you for not bringing in your prey today. Thank you so much for that. Huh? Dun, dun, dun. For you, this is the defense. And I've seen the discussion in the chat about the way they talk about the then diagnosis of her and how they use that as a way for to more or less as of the closing arguments, the jury more or less have two choices: life or death. And the defense in this case cannot do much more than to plead for Eileen's life. and they are using more or less the only thing they have for her, which is the diagnosis. I know as well as many of you guys, there are a percentage of the population lives day by day with similar diagnosis and are perfectly fine. Even they don't they don't go around ending people. And but this is the defense. They're trying to save her life, and if that is all they have, then they will use it, as they should, even though it has a weird taste to it listening to it.
Remember that she has had visual problems since she was a small child. That's documented in her school reports. But Barry said that Lee was fine. Remember that her school records, now we're talking, we're grade school. Remember, she quit school in the 9th grade. And grade school records show that they were medicating her with tranquilizers to try to make it easier for her to function in a world, in a classroom where she has never, ever had a place. And the brother says, no, Lee was fine, there weren't any problems. Remember what the doctors told you about the cousin, Mr. Lightala, who considered Lee's grandfather to be an uncle that he wanted to spend time with. And they told you that he spent a good deal of time in their home. And he described Lee's grandfather as a Jekyll and Hyde. He described a man who, when he drank, could be abusive and was very, very different than the person that Barry described to you. Remember that Barry, Lee's uncle, brother, ultimately she found out he wasn't her brother, came into this courtroom and testified against Lee in a proceeding in which the state is trying to kill her. Testified against her. What does that tell you about how dysfunctional that family must have been and still is? What better evidence do you have of a dysfunctional family? Remember the subtle things he said about what that family was all about. He testified from the stand, and I wrote it down. Their adoption was a sore point within our family. He described the siblings as Barry and Lori, natural children, were good. Lee and Keith were bad. And it was a sore point in that family. What does that tell you? Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Mallory is dead. And that is a terrible, terrible thing. We are not asking that you forget that. I submit that each of us feel that all of mankind is somehow diminished when we learn that a person has died at the hands of another. I suggest that all of us feel confusion and pain, and we feel like something has gone awry. We all suffer a loss. We are not asking you to forget that or put that aside. Richard Mallory is dead, and he should not have died. What we are asking that you do is to consider the circumstances of his death and consider Lee's involvement in light of who she is, in light of her history, her lifestyle, what she was perceiving. Do not evaluate Lee's actions on that night in terms of what another person may or may not have done. This is about Lee. That is what these proceedings, these second phase proceedings have all been about. This is about Lee. Lee, who dealt with her experience with Mr. Mallory with all the sophistication and understanding and insight of a damaged, primitive child. Do not judge her by what another person may or may not have done. The experts explained to you, or tried to explain to you, who Lee is and why she responded the way she did back in that early morning hours of December 1st of '89. They've all told you that she suffers from minimal brain damage. They've explained to you that her disorder causes her to live an unfulfilled, frustrated, paranoid, persecuted, unhappy life. And I want to make sure that you understand that we are not offering these as excuses. We are not telling you that she's not responsible. She told you she was responsible. She killed him. But understand, in her mind, by her perceptions, she thought she was in danger and that she was threatened, and it was the only thing to do. These, again, are not excuses. We offer them as explanations and reasons that you can consider when trying to make a decision as to whether or not Lee should live or die. They're not excuses. There is no excuse. And we are not asking you to forget Richard Mallory. All that we are asking is that you take all of this into consideration before you make your decision. We all deserve that. You, as well as everyone that's been going through this procedure. You need to know the person before you can make a decision like you've been asked to make. The judge will instruct you that if you are reasonably convinced that Lee was under the influence of extreme mental and emotional distress at the time that Richard Mallory died, that you can consider that a mitigating factor. You can consider that as a reason to vote for life. The judge will instruct you that if you find or are reasonably convinced that Lee's ability to appreciate the criminality of her conduct or conform her conduct to the requirements of law were substantially impaired, that is something that you can consider as a mitigating factor, a reason to vote for life. You will hear that you can consider virtually anything about Lee and the circumstances surrounding this offense as a reason to vote for life. Mr. Tanner, in his closing, told you that mental impairment is a defense of last resort. It's what defense lawyers do when they don't have anything else. Well, that is not true. Defense lawyers take their cases as they come, and they have a moral and an ethical obligation to raise those defenses that are apparent. Lee is impaired. She's dysfunctional. She suffers from a personality disorder. We, yes, raised it. And we raised it because it was proper, because it was right, and because it was our obligation to do so. It is not a last resort. It is the truth. Mr. Tanner told you that Interesting, isn't it, the way the experts all have a different way of, a different approach to handling the same situation. Recall their testimony, was it really so different? But most importantly, recall that they all came to the same conclusion. Remember that the doctors said that what really happened, the truthfulness of Lee's description of what occurred on that night, was not really relevant. What was important in light of her dysfunction and her impairment was what she perceived. That's what was important. And they told you that without even knowing the facts of the case, their diagnosis would be the same. Mr. Tanner tried to diminish Dr. Kropp's credentials and his credibility by telling you that the reason he was called is because he is an expert in sexual dysfunction. Dr. Kropp, if you will recall, has had years and years and years and years of experience in forensic psychology. He told you that as a subspecialty, he dealt in sexual dysfunction. Well, certainly, he had an opportunity to evaluate someone who fit into both of those categories, and that is why.
Hey, look at that. Thank you, Atheist Ant. Hey, Nick, here's some drunk Nick shopping money. Thank you so much. I don't know if I went shopping yesterday. I don't think so, but I wouldn't rule it out. We will know in about 6 to 8 weeks. But thank you so much, Atheist Ant, for your support. Thank you.
He testified in this courtroom. Again, please understand that these are not excuses. There is no excuse. There are reasons for you to consider when trying to make a decision as to whether or not Lee should live or die. Do not be deceived into thinking that life imprisonment is not punishment. I suggest to you that one of life's ultimate gifts is freedom. I suggest to you that if a person were locked forever in, let's say, a mansion, that they would suffer agony every time they looked out the window with the knowledge that they could never go outside again. Consider the prospect of terminal confinement. The judge will instruct you, and you will hear that a sentence of life imprisonment is a sentence of life without possibility of parole until after serving 25 years. That is a mere possibility. Life in prison is severe. Every second of every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month of every year, Lee will be confined. Someone else will tell her when to go to bed and when to get up. Someone else will tell her when and what she can eat. Someone else will tell her what she can read. When she longs for the comfort of human touch, she can't have it.
Well,
she will be separated forever.
Well, I'm not so sure about that human touch thing in prison, and even in women's prison. I'm not so sure she can be denied. unless lifers in Florida is on that 23-1 schedule, 23 hours in cell and 1 hour break.
From the freedom that she has known since she was a young girl and began to travel freely across the country, sadly unrestrained by the restrictions that keep all of us close to home. She has been free out in the open for most of her life. She will go to sleep every night in a metal cage, surrounded by the sorrow, the heartache, and the bitter loneliness of others. If she's lucky, she'll have a window. If she's real lucky, that window will give her a view instead of just more metal bars and razor wire, will give her a view of the world outside. And every time she looks at the outside world, she is going to remember what she did to lose it. Her longing, ladies and gentlemen, will always, always bring her pain. Lee lost her freedom in January of last year. I suggest to you that, as with all human beings, though, she has maintained some degree of hope. I suggest to you that there has always been the belief that somehow, and it was a childlike belief, somehow everything will be all right. Well, in the last couple of days, Lee has had to accept that nothing will ever be all right again. Ever. When she leaves this courtroom for the last time, she goes without hope. Whether the sentence is life imprisonment or death, Lee has lost her life. Even if you are merciful, you will simply be giving her the mere right to exist. Please go back there. Please go back and decide that that is punishment enough. Thank you.
N.Starow was also known as Susan.
Okay, and here is the jury instructions. I mean, the defense, that is all they had. Hail Mary on somehow awakening sympathy after the jury have been hearing and seeing the damage she did. And yeah, all of those guys were customers of her, temporary customers. One of them was a Bible salesperson. Bible salesperson who was married, apparently, and still was chasing women of the night. So does that mean they deserve to die? No, absolutely not. Were they innocent? I would say no. Did they deserve to die? Absolutely not. But her victims weren't exactly clean cut. And maybe the triggering factor was she was attacked. We don't know. That is her story in the first victim. Maybe it was. We don't know. But 7 people from December of 1989 to November of 1990. And then she was caught in January of 1991, and the trial started January of 1992. So this was fast. From the start of her killings to the end of the trial was just over 2 years. Just over 2 years. But let's listen to the jury instructions. And also, a reminder, compared to the jury instructions in the YSL case and this, I mean, back then, the judges had more freedom of setting their own jury instructions. There were still suggested ones, but today it's ridiculous how bad jury instructions have been.
Housing, also known as Lori Christine Rookie, also known as Kenny Marjorie, for her crime of first-degree murder. As you have been told, the conversations to what punishment should be imposed and responsibility of the judge. However, it is your duty to follow a law that will now be given to you by the court and render to the court an advisory sentence based upon your determination as to whether sufficient aggravating circumstances exist to justify the imposition of the death penalty and whether sufficient mitigating circumstances exist to outweigh any aggravating circumstances found to exist. Your recommendation is important and will be given great weight in imposing the sentence. Your advisory sentence should be based upon the evidence that you have heard while finding guilt or innocence of the defendant and the evidence that has been presented to you in these proceedings. The aggravating circumstances that you may consider are limited to any of the following that are established by the evidence. The defendant has previously been convicted of another capital offense or of a felony involving the use of or threat of violence to some person. The crime for which the defendant is to be sentenced was committed while she was engaged in committing the crime of robbery with a firearm of Richard Mallett. The crime for which the defendant is to be sentenced was committed for the purpose of avoiding or preventing a lawful arrest or effecting the escape from custody. The crime for which the defendant is to be sentenced was committed for pecuniary gain. The crime for which the defendant is to be sentenced was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Heinous means extremely wicked or shockingly evil. Atrocious means outrageously wicked and vile. Cruel means designed to inflict a high degree of pain with utter indifference to or even enjoyment of the suffering of others. The kind of crime intended to be included as heinous, atrocious, or cruel is one accompanied by additional acts that show that the crime was conscienceless or pitiless and was unnecessary torturous to the victim. The crime for which the defendant to be sentenced was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. If you find the aggravating circumstances do not justify the death penalty, your advisory sentence should be one of life imprisonment without possibility of parole or 25 years. Should you find sufficient aggravating circumstances do exist, it will then be your duty to determine whether mitigating circumstances exist that outweigh the aggravating circumstances. Among the mitigating circumstances you may consider, if established by the evidence, are the crime for which the defendant is to be sentenced was committed while she was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance. The victim was a participant in the defendant's conduct and consent to the act. The capacity of the defendant to appreciate the criminality of her conduct or to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law was substantially impaired. The age of the defendant at the time of the crime and any other aspect of the defendant's character or record and any other circumstances of the offense. Each aggravating circumstance must be established beyond reasonable doubt before it may be considered by you in arriving at your decision. If one or more aggravating circumstances are established, you should consider all the evidence tending to establish one or more mitigating circumstances and give that evidence such weight as you feel it should receive in reaching your conclusion as to the sentence that should be imposed. Mitigating circumstances need not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt by the defendant. If you are reasonably convinced that a mitigating circumstance exists, you may consider it as established. The sentence that you recommend to the court must be based upon the facts you find from the evidence and the law. You should weigh the aggravating circumstances against the mitigating circumstances, and your advisory sentence must be based on these considerations. In these proceedings, it is not necessary that the advisory sentence be unanimous. The fact of determination of whether you recommend a sentence of death or a sentence of life imprisonment in this case can be reached by a single ballot should not influence you to act hastily or without due regard to the gravity of these proceedings. Before you ballot, you must and should carefully weigh, sift, and consider the evidence and all of it, realizing the human life is at stake, and bring to bear your best judgment in reaching your advisory sentence. If a majority of the jury determined that N.Starow Wuornos should be sentenced to death, your advisory sentence will be as follows. The majority of the jury, by a vote of, and your 4-1 will place the number, advise and recommend to the court that it impose the death penalty upon N.Starow Wuornos. If, on the other hand, by 6 or more votes, the jury determines that Aileen Wuornos should not be sentenced to death, your advisory sentence will be: the jury advises and recommends to the court that it impose a sentence upon life imprisonment upon Aileen Wuornos without possibility of parole for 25 years. You will now desire to consider your recommendation. When you have reached the advisory sentence in conformity with these instructions, that form of recommendation can be under format for women and return to the court. The defense or the state desire to exact evidence and the verdict wants to be made available to the jury.
Yeah, that was the entirety of the jury instructions in a murder case back in 1992. We have covered several murder cases on this channel, and the alternative charges and this and that and this and that. It shouldn't be more than what this judge just did. It shouldn't. Why would more be necessary? And for me, it is something that Steve Gosney told me, that these jury instructions you hear nowadays are from a bunch of people suggesting or making rules about, okay, if you are for this crime, this is the sets you need to use and stuff like that. And for me, that is taking away the judge's job, in my opinion. All right. Now it is time for penalty phase and sentencing.
We need
In the circuit court, 7th Judicial Circuit, in Volusia County Court, case number 91-257, State of Florida versus Aileen Wuornos, also known as Susan Lynn Blahovic, also known as Lori Christine Grady, also known as Tammy Marsh Green. As to count one, the majority of the jury, by a vote of 12 to nothing, advise and recommend to the court that it impose the death penalty upon Aileen Carol Wuornos, also known as Susan Lynn Blahovic, also known as Lori Christine Grady, also known as Cammie Marsh Green, dated at DeLand, Volusia County, Florida, this 30th day of January 1992. Pamela J. Mills, foreperson.
Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, are going to ask each of you individually concerning the advisory sentence. It's not necessary that you state how you personally voted or how any other person voted, but only if the advisory sentence is read was correctly stated. Madam Clerk, will you please vote?
Do you, Mrs. Staton, agree and confirm that the majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk?
Yes.
Do you, Mrs. Farrell, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk? Do you, Mrs. Mills, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk?
Yes.
Do you, Mr. DeGainer, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk? Do you, Mrs. Mathis, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk?
Yes.
Do you, Mrs. Walters, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk?
Yes, I do.
Do you, Mrs. Wiley, agree and confirm that the majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk?
Yes.
Do you, Mr. Flowers, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk?
Yes.
Do you, Mrs. Bogan, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk? Do you, Mr. Watley, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk? Do you, Mr. Aransky, agree and confirm the majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk?
Yes.
Do you, Mr. Bashal, agree and confirm that a majority of the jury join in the advisory sentence that you have just heard read by the clerk?
Yes.
Thank you all.
Any further discussion?
Nothing but to say, Your Honor. Thank you.
No, Judge, thank
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to express to you, thank you very much for your time and consideration for this case. I also wish to advise you of some very special privileges that are enjoyed by jurors. No juror can ever be required to talk about the discussions that occur in the jury room except by court order. For many centuries, our society has relied on juries for consideration of difficult cases. We've recognized for hundreds of years the jury's deliberations, their discussions, and their votes to remain their private affairs so long as they wish. Therefore, the law gives you unique privilege not to speak about the jury's work. Although you are at liberty to speak with anyone about your deliberations, you're also at liberty to refuse to speak with them. A request may come from those who are simply curious or may seek to find fault with you. It will be up to you to decide whether to preserve your privacy as a juror. For those instructions, the jury is in recess and discharge for further obligation and responsibility herein. Notice is scheduled for 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. This is bad to us for the jury out of
Judge, before we leave, we would renew all previous applications and motions and evidence. Thank you, Judge.
the order that are here about that. Recess.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Third report in the third stuff, judicial circuit is now in session. The Honorable Judge Uriel Blunt Jr.
Yeah, and this now they jumped up until the actual. Now they jumped forward to when the actual sentencing is. The jury can only recommend, but it's the judge who ultimately decides if that is the punishment that is going to be. And he did. Now, after this trial, which was for the murder of Richard Mallory, she pleaded no contest to the murder of Humphreys Perez Spears. Ow. And also Carskaddon a little bit later, and Antonio. She received a total of 6 death sentences. The only victim she wasn't convicted of was that of Peter Seams, because his body was never found. And then she spent 10 years on death row. She made several interviews. So there is a good number of documentaries out there, a good number of them. But in October of, Mr. Jingles, took place October 9th, 2002. And her final meal was a cup of coffee. And her last words supposedly was, quote, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back. Like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back. I'll be back." Yeah, her mental status deteriorated quite severely in prison. And 9:47 a.m. on October 9th by lethal injection, Aileen Wuornos passed away, was executed for her crimes after just 10 years. But she did more or less ask to get it sped up. And the state of Florida said, well, okay. Now, what will be next on serial killer specials? Well, I have something. I don't know what day, sometime in the future. And it will be Ted Bundy. Through Internet Archive, I have found a number of recordings, and I will go through them to see if they are in the right order so I can present it properly for you. So that will be the next serial killer special, the trial of Ted Bundy. For you who don't know, if I remember correctly, he represented himself for a good portion of the trial. So, yeah, that will be next. And after that, I'm not entirely sure, but the parameters need to be a televised trial. Not all of these famous serial killers trials was televised. Now, the Ted Bundy tapes, believe, was never saved by the TV stations at the time, but it has been somewhat restored and put out there. But I need some time to get through them all to see, okay, at what point did anybody, are they in order as you see here? Okay, folks, that is the conclusion of the Aileen Wuornos trial. Aileen Monster Wuornos, 7 victims. And Richard Charles Mallory, aged 51. David Andrew Spears, age 47. Charles Edmund Carskaddon, age 40. Peter Abraham Seams, age 65. Troy Eugene Burress, age 50. Charles Richard Humphreys, age 56. And Walter Gino Antonio, age 61. Rest in peace. Okay. Don't have much else for you for now. Sunday, I'm going to take my rest this Sunday. I have some work to do on the farm. I will be sending you off to Legal Vices, who apparently has some. I don't know what him and Aussie Overlord is up to, but it seems fun. But again, as per usual, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to do this. Thank you for allowing me to try to translate these different trials to you. And hug your family. Unless your family is crap, then screw them and give your love to the people who deserve it. Okay? See you Monday for more Young Thug Trial. Bye-bye.